Hey guys, welcome to Masquerade of Motherhood, or as I like to call it, the Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place where I am giving you permission to not have it all together. I have some really exciting news. Due to the response from the podcast, I have decided to take the Mom Show on the road. If you're part of a group and you would like for me to speak, follow the link to my website, CourtneyDoyleMinistries.com, and complete the request. This month, our episodes are dedicated to mental health and suicide awareness. Our guests will bravely share personal stories from their experiences with their children. We want to emphasize that these topics are sensitive and could be triggering for some listeners. If you or someone you know is contemplating suicide, please know that there are resources linked in the show notes of each episode. We approach these discussions with care and empathy, aiming to raise awareness and provide support. Thank you for tuning in as we navigate these important conversations together. Welcome back to the podcast. Today is going to be a really special day. And I know I say this for each episode, but sometimes you meet a guest or you read a guest's book and you realize it is important to hear this voice on this podcast. And so I am going to immediately turn the microphone over to my guest today, Lori. And I would like for you, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Thanks so much for having me, Courtney. I'm so excited to be on your program and to have this opportunity to talk with the moms that are listening today. My name is Lori Wildenberg, and I am a licensed parent and family educator. I'm also an author of 6 parenting books, and the one that I believe brought me to you is my most recent one, Messy Hope: Help Your Child Overcome Anxiety, Depression, or Suicidal Ideation. And that's a heavy topic, but we are going to be equipping people today, and it's important for us to be able to do that. So when people listen to your show, that they walk away with some good tools. So I write books and I speak and I coach parents, and I'm a mom of 4 adult children. I have 3 in-laws, or in-loves, as I like to say. And then I also have 4 little grands, and my oldest grand is 5. And he just started kindergarten this fall. And my youngest one just turned 1 yesterday.
Oh.
They're little ones and they're awesome. And I've been married to my college sweetheart. So, yeah, so that's a little bit about me and my family and what I do.
That's wonderful. Now, in this series, it's titled Help My Child and fill in the blank. And so, as a mom of 4, I'm going to ask you that question because I know that there's some things that you have experienced with your children. And another mom is going to say, oh, wow, she gets me, or she's been there. And that's the whole point, is for people to realize you're not alone. We're going to meet you in the messy middle. And so answer that question for me, Lori. Help my child.
Help, my child is experiencing anxiety and depression. What can I do? How can I help my kid? Yeah, the mental illness is rampant. 1 in 4 are diagnosed with some sort of mental illness today. 1 in 4. So think of that.
Unreal.
Yes, it is. And depression typically hits right around the late teens, early 20s. That's usually when depression sets in. Anxiety can be something that occurs earlier, although I've interviewed people who have kids that are depressed, are actually diagnosed as having depression at the age of 5. So it isn't necessarily for the teens and the young adults. It can happen across the board. That's just the most typical. Yeah, probably there's going to be probably a lot of people listening today that have somebody who is wrestling with, or they're worried could be wrestling with these things, with anxiety or depression.
And did you experience that personally with one of your children?
Yes, my youngest one, she went through a period of time where she was experiencing actually both anxiety and depression. They can go hand in hand. What I didn't know is, as a preteen, as a tween, she actually developed an eating disorder. And I didn't realize that an eating disorder often goes hand in hand with depression. I didn't
Mm.
know that at the time. And we got help and worked through the eating disorder. And I guess I was completely unprepared for the fact that she would be struggling with depression. Because her countenance is typically very joyful and very happy. Sometimes when people struggle with depression, as you like to say, they might wear a mask. They might have this mask where they're really happy. And she felt like that was the role that she needed to play. So it was difficult to kind of weed through some of these things to realize that she was actually really struggling in her senior year of college.
And what were some warnings and red flags for you? You mentioned that early on there was the eating disorder, which you were aware of, but you did not couple it with this
Mhm.
depression, and that oftentimes there is a common thread between these things. So, what were some red flags and warnings that you saw when you knew something is not okay?
Um, there were a few things that she would say that she was away at school, right? So she wasn't under our roof. But there were a few things that would just give me a heads up. It was a God nudge that something's not right here. She would say things like she really didn't care about something when before she'd been fully invested in something.
Mm.
Or some really, when it got to the point where it was at a crisis mode, she was making decisions that didn't make any sense. They were really impulsive and erratic. Like she said, I am going to, I'm going to quit my job today. It was just like almost out of the blue. Or she was telling me that there were some issues with some friends that had gotten to be really difficult. And she was sharing that with me. And then she'd say, I'm going to go for a drive. And that scared me because I thought we live in the mountains around here, and driving in
Mhm.
Colorado when you're not mentally with the program is scary.
Yeah.
And she also liked to do so many extreme sports, which she still does, but she would really push the envelope. But the thing that I felt was really the most telling was when she was talking to me and her voice was completely flat. It was
Mm.
void of all emotions. Now, this child, this daughter, she's got big emotions, big happy, big sad, never flat, never a flat affect. That frightened me the most. And previous to that, probably a few months earlier, a friend of hers gave me a call and said that he really thought that she could use some time with the family because she'd been really sad. And for a friend to reach out on her behalf also was huge and something to pay attention to, because that doesn't typically happen in college, to have
Mhm.
someone call their friends' parents to say, I am worried. I'm worried about her. So that the flat affect was also something that was really concerning. And this is might sound a little bit strange, but her room, her college room, was a disaster. And I think it was indicative of what was going on in her brain. It was such a mess, and there was just clothes everywhere and all kinds of things on the floor. It was as if she didn't have the ability to stop and organize herself and make some good decisions. Those were all really big red flags. And then the day of the flat affect, I told her that I was going to come the next day to school. This was later in the day that I had heard that in her voice. And what I didn't know is she had made a plan to take her life, not because she wanted to die, but because she didn't want to live, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. And so I didn't know this, but then the next morning drove to her school to stay with her, and she had attempted to take her life, but it was an unsuccessful attempt, praise God. And
Mm-hmm.
she didn't totally tell me that this is what had happened. I guess she woke up and thought, "Oh gosh, I'm still here." And then another crazy thought was she was thinking that she would pack everything up so we wouldn't have so much to do when we found her. These are things that don't make sense, but they make sense to a brain that's struggling to really to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Sweet girl. And I'm sure in those moments she felt so just hopeless.
yeah.
Even though it sounds like she had a good relationship with friends, to have a friend in college who is worried about you to reach out to a
Mhm.
parent. So she had good friends there. She sounds like she was involved, had a job, obviously a good relationship with you to
Mhm.
be able to communicate with you. And even with all of that support, she felt that she was in a hopeless situation. And
Mhm.
you're saying this was the depression that was speaking
Yeah.
to her, not a healthy brain that was speaking to her. I want to quote this from your book right there in the introduction, because you did mention one of the statistics, and I want the parents to hear this. So, this is your words: suicide has become the second leading cause of death in young children behind accidents. There is evidence of the lack of hope in mental illness exponentially exploding and manifesting itself in loneliness, anxiety, depression, fearfulness, and suicide. Here's the statistics that you quoted from the National Health Service: 12.8%, roughly 1 in 8. And here's the numbers that blew my mind: 5 to 19-year-olds have at least one mental health disorder when this was assessed in 2019. Then
Mhm.
that rises to 16.9% of 17 to 19-year-olds. The analysis also finds that 1 in 4 children ages 11 to 16 with mental problems have either self harmed or already attempted suicide. And then this rises to almost half of young people ages 17 to 18 with a disorder.
Mhm.
Those statistics uh, blew my mind
Yeah.
because, like you said, you have met with people who have 5-year-olds who are depressed. And now, when you look at 1 in 4 children between 11 and 16 are struggling with a mental health problem, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
And, but like you mentioned, anxiety, we tend to see that younger. I have a couple of kiddos that have struggled with anxiety, and
Mhm.
it took a minute to figure out, what is this? What's going on? And that those red flags were maybe not wanting to go to school, severe stomach aches. That was a big one. Just stomach aches or headaches were big red flags for us that,
Yes.
wait, this isn't actually a stomach ache. This is something is feeding this anxious feeling, and we need to be aware. But wouldn't you, because it's so rampant? Look, there's no secret. Our society is filled with people who are anxious and depressed right now. And some would say this is just the new norm. Are anxiety
Yeah.
and depression the new norm? And do
Yeah,
we
they say
accept that
that.
as the new norm?
Oh, no, we don't accept it. There's a lot we can do in the middle of it, and there's a lot we can do to prevent it. And
Mhm.
not all of our prevention is going to work, but if we can do some things to prevent, such as helping our kids be flexible thinkers, helping them be good problem solvers, those are two things that really build resiliency. Now, we don't just want to bounce back, we want to bounce forward, and bouncing forward is a hopeful thing. Just bouncing back is resiliency, which is a good thing, right? But it's like elastic. If you keep stretching the elastic, like with resiliency, pretty soon it doesn't work. So you need both resiliency plus hope. You need both. And if we can train our kids in flexible thinking and problem solving, those are things that are going to help with the resiliency, as also allowing them to experience sadness and failure while
Mm.
they're under our roof, rather than protecting them from it. Because when we protect them from it, then they don't expect to experience it. And as we know, the older you get, the bigger the disappointments, the bigger the failures, the bigger the consequences of those things. So if you haven't had a little practice in dealing with failure and understanding how to bounce back or bounce forward, What do you do when you're not under your parents' roof anymore? And this whole lie about happiness, so often when I speak to parent groups, I'll say, raise your hands if you just want your kids to be happy. Haven't we all thought that at some point? And most of the hands go up. But let me tell you, that is a fourth of a life, and it is not equipping people to move forward in life when they experience fear or anger or disappointment. All they can do is deal with happy. And that's the easiest thing to deal with. We need to raise the bar so that our kids are able to experience a little fear so they know how to be courageous, experience a little anger so they know how to maybe work towards something to solve a problem, because anger is such a great indicator that there's an issue, but it's a terrible way to solve a problem. These are things that we need to be able to allow our kids to experience, and not to protect them from the mad, from the sad, from the fearful things, but to come alongside them and offer hope. And in doing that, you also offer help and hope. And another thing that I think of is our Western culture. We are so stuck on being independent, and we think, I've got to solve this on my own. I've got to pull myself up from my bootstraps. The Lord has put people around us to help us walk through these things. And we are not in this alone. God has put us in community, and we are created to be in relationship, in community, so that we can help each other out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We talked about the mask that we often wear as moms, and you've got this cry of help. My child is anxious, depressed, potentially these suicidal thoughts, attempted suicides. And like you just said, we hole into ourselves like, I can fix this. I'm in control of this. And so then we wear this mask that I've got this. You mentioned if you're feeling super spiritual, you're like, oh, God's got this. And I have been so guilty of saying both of those statements. But you call it the perfection infection. And I was just like, yes, I love that statement, because I want to dive into that. When we have that perfection infection, I was thinking about it in visual terms, and I was like, okay, when I picture that as an infection, infections are yucky and they're painful and they don't look really good. And I'm like, okay, that is the enemy and all of his nasty coming out, because we are being infected by guilt and shame and isolation. And when we live our lives infected, would you agree that in turn, we're infecting our children with the
Oh,
same disease?
we pass it along. You're exactly right. We totally do. When they watch us struggle with something and yet we don't ask for help, and we put on this facade like it's all good, oh, God's got it, or no problem, I've got it, rather than being honest and saying, hey, I'm struggling. Because if we are not able to say, I'm struggling, and model that by speaking it, but also model it by reaching out for help, our kids are going to feel like they are in this life alone and they have got to do this all by themselves. And that is like you said, it's a huge lie from the enemy, that we feel like we've got to do all of this exactly right, exactly perfectly. And not only that, we have to do it on our own steam. We are not dependent on the Lord, and we are not interdependent with family members or friends. And that's not how we are created. And no one is perfect. And I feel such a concern for so many kids today, because they are supposed to be perfect in everything. They're supposed to be the best in every single class. Oh no, they got a C in math. What are we going to do about that? But yet here, maybe they got an A in their writing class. I barely passed math, but I'm doing just fine. And it's okay. We aren't meant to be everything. If we had everything and we're meant to be perfect, we would be Jesus. And
Mhm.
we are not. And
Right.
so we need each other. We are meant to rely on one another and to depend on the Lord. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need God. We would be God.
Mhm, mhm. And that's coming down from higher level institutions as well. Your children have to have this resume just to go from high school to college, that the
Mm.
GPAs and the scores and all of this is has to be so lined up. Okay, they did all of this. Now what kind of volunteer work did they do? And have they saved children in Uganda? It's like these kids, oh, and by the way, what sport
Mhm.
are they doing or
Mhm.
what creative work are they doing? What instrument did they play? It's this setup
Mhm.
for letdown, and
Yes.
as moms, we have to be fighting against it.
Yeah. And to give the reality, Courtney, what I realized when I was putting together Messy Hope and doing all kinds of research is that there is toxic positivity and there is reality. And what our kids, it's not a bad thing to be positive, but to be positive in the midst of when they've got a disappointment, that isn't very sensitive, right?
Mm,
We have to be careful when we implement the positivity. And what they need the most is the reality. The
mhm,
reality is life doesn't always go the way we would expect it to go. Even if we've checked off all the boxes that make it look like we've perfectly done this, it won't always. I worked with one family, Courtney, and I am telling you, they were at they were so distressed because their child was an overachiever and awesome, worked hard because this young person thought that if I continue to do this, I will get into the exact college that I want to get into. And it's like a no brainer. He wasn't accepted, even though he was like one of the valedictorians and all of these things, all the boxes were checked. And he was so angry, and he was so angry with his parents because he was raised in a way that he thought, if I do all these things, if I perform this way, everything will go the way it should.
mhm.
And sometimes, even as parents, we feel like that. Hey, God, I raised my kids in the way that I should have, and look what's going on over here.
Mhm.
Sometimes we feel like that too, even as parents. So we can understand it. But reality is, we live in a fallen world and we have an enemy who hates us and hates our God. So God is good, but life is still hard.
Yeah.
And life is hard, and God is still good. Yeah.
And I'm sure because that child had probably been pretty, quote, unquote, "perfect" for most of his life,
Yes.
this no, this failure in his eyes felt so much bigger than necessary.
It
And
was a
I think
huge
it's
blow. Yes.
I'm sure. And sometimes that happens because when there are consequences maybe to our children's failure or things that happen, instead of letting the natural consequences take their course, I liken it to we are the broom and the dustpan, just sweeping it all up behind them so they never see the destruction of their choices. And
Mm.
and again, like you said, the older we get, the greater that the issues are that we face. And so when we're not letting them experience some failure in our home or under our roof, it can be really difficult. I'm going to shift a little bit because you, in Messy Hope, you mentioned that there are tools that you have provided to help families and to provide them with hope, like hope in the possibly the mental disorder of anxiety or depression or the suicidal thoughts. Hope in I didn't get accepted to the college that I wanted to go to, whatever it may be. Will you share with us those tools?
Here's a great one. Even if. So let's say that that is a line to say when things aren't working out, or if you're afraid that things won't work out. So even if I don't get into this school, I can still, because rather than what if I don't get in, or I'm afraid I don't get in, that can paralyze a person. but to say, even if I don't get in, even if I'm not accepted, I can still, because then there's still a feeling of having some sort of control, a little bit of control or a little bit of power in the situation by saying that, rather than the situation is taking over everything. And that leads to hopelessness. We want to provide help, and we want to provide hope. And there are some small things that we can do as our kids are growing up to encourage that sort of idea. So here's a tip that I give lots of parents, and it doesn't matter the age. They don't have to be parents of little ones or parents of older ones. This is a philosophy that you can implement in your family that will really help your kids understand interdependency, which is a very important piece in providing hope and also getting help. Okay. So when my kids were little, I had 4 kids. They were all very close in age. It wasn't a meal until somebody spilled. Somebody always spilled, and it drove me insane. And I thought, I am going to kill someone if over this spillage. So I had to come up with something. Now, I didn't come up with this thinking, wow, this will be our family philosophy, and wow, this is really great. It was survival of the fittest, mine. And so I came up with these lines. That's okay. Everybody spills. I'll help you clean it up. Now, I'm not talking about the kiddo that does the spilling on purpose. This is the accident. That's okay. We need to normalize mistakes. That's okay. We need to let our kids know that we're not going to freak out when a mistake happens, when things aren't going perfectly. They need to know it's okay. It's okay. And by saying that's okay, that changed something in me. But it also affected my child, knowing that, okay, mom, dad can handle the mess. That's okay. Everybody spills. Everybody makes mistakes. Oh my goodness, Courtney, you're probably at this phase too. Everybody crashes the car, right? That's okay. Everybody spills. I will help you clean it up. We're not abdicating their responsibility, but they're knowing that we're going to come alongside them. And we may not always be able to come alongside them. There have been times where my kids have called and we can't get there, but we can come alongside them on the phone, or we can offer some sort of encouragement by letting them know, hey, you are capable to manage this. And I am here for you if you need some help. So those are some tools that I think are really helpful. Just having a philosophy like that, letting your kids know they're not in this world all by themselves. They're not their own little island. They're the peninsula, right? They're attached, and we can help them. We can help them, and we can stir hope by letting them know that it's a smart and it's a brave thing to ask for help if you need help. It's good to have an out-of-the-box perspective, to be able to see things from a different point of view. Now, of course, that's not something that we want to talk about when they're in the middle of the hard thing by, wow, you're going to learn a lot from this, or that's not the time. But as they're growing up and they can see you dealing with hard things, and you can say, looking back, I can see this was the best outcome because now here I'm at this point and I learned this. Prayer is another tool. Praying for your kids, praying with your kids. And when you're really in a hard space, I've had times where I flat out can't pray because I just can't. But I've got a prayer partner and she will pray on my behalf. So prayer is important too. And another tool to expect the unexpected, to realize that life doesn't always go the way we expect it to go, even if we've done everything right. I think those are some tools that we can use to set the stage for our kids as they are growing up, so they're prepared for difficulty, and so that depression will not overcome them, but that they can overcome the sadness, and that sadness rather than getting to depression, sadness, it's temporary. It is a
Mhm.
temporary situation. And for them to know that it won't always feel like this. So there's a lot we can do to help our kids even before they get into a hard situation.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you talk about that, there are with 6 children, I've had some that have gone through early childhood, junior high school, fairly unscathed by anything really difficult.
Mm.
But when you think about that, the earlier you start, like you said, even if it's just with the spilling of the
Mhm.
dinner at a very young age, letting them know, hey, that's okay. Things happen. Now let's clean it up. Small steps like that for the mom who is younger, who's listening, that
Mhm.
may say, I'm not there yet. I'm not facing these big car accident type moments. But when we start that communication and that openness with simple things, then it
Yes.
builds on the big things, because you may have a child that goes, like I said, pretty unscathed through a good portion of their life,
Mhm.
but eventually something happens. It's just the world we live in. And it's just like you said, life is hard and God is good. And so, but in one of the chapters, Hope Killers, you say there's some common statements that we use as parents that are actually working against us and not for us in that communication with our children. Let's talk about that. What are some of the hope killer statements? Because I feel like I'm guilty. I know I'm guilty. I'm going to
Well,
confess right now.
we all are, right? I think one of the biggest ones is comparison. And that is huge. And we can do it with the best of intentions. I know that I did it with the best of intentions. And goodness, I know better, right? I study this stuff. I know comparison's a terrible thing. But I don't know, sometimes things just pop out of your mouth that you don't expect. So
Yes.
as I mentioned, my youngest had an eating disorder. And this occurred when she was a tween and getting a little thicker around the middle, just because that's what happens before you get your period. And she wasn't heavy by any means, but in her mind, she was.
Hmm.
And we've got 4 kids, and the sister closest to her in age had a different body type and tall and slender. And she really didn't go through that thick through the middle stage too much. And rather than me just talking with my youngest and saying, now, why do you think this? And working toward problem solving and flexible thinking, right? I just offered a piece of advice that really backfired. And I said, just eat healthy and exercise like your sister. Oh, could someone have smacked me right upside the head? That was the worst thing I could have said. And that was one of the cogs to the wheel that probably encouraged that eating disorder. And it didn't, but it could have really done some relational damage with my 2 girls. Thankfully, it did not, but it sure could have. So
Yeah.
when we do that, when we say, yeah, if you want to do this, you should act so and do that, that is not going to bode well for your child. Only speak to their situation rather than bring up somebody else. So that's
Mhm.
one of the biggest ones.
Gosh, that's
Another thing,
hard.
I
'Cause and
know,
I don't
yeah,
want I want you to hold that thought. Sometimes it's you, like you said, you see something positive another child's doing, and it's you're using it more as motivation. Like,
we think.
"Hey, little Su" it feels that way. "Little Susie goes to school and doesn't cry.
Yeah,
She loves doing that." When you
yeah.
maybe have an anxious child that doesn't want to go to school and they're crying to get out of the car, and you're, like, trying to motivate and point out the positive in somebody else, but like you said, inadvertently, what you're doing is you're comparing, and it's poison to the
Mhm.
relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
guilty. Okay, keep on with the next
Well,
thought. Did I
here's another one. Being a little bit of a bubble popper or a dream wrecker.
mm,
So your kiddo comes to you with something that they're dreaming of that they'd like to do. And you decide that's the place where we're going to give you a bunch of harsh reality. Okay. There's a difference between being real and harsh reality. Well, you'll never be able to do that because you don't do A, B, or C. or, saying things that really wreck their dream. And here's a situation that isn't exactly a dream wrecker, but my third oldest, she had been in soccer and her coach had a little bit of a temper and he threw his clipboard and it busted. And my daughter wanted us to go to the store and buy him a new one. Now, that was really a sweet gesture on her part. But I was thinking, we're too busy. That guy should buy his own clipboard because he threw it and he broke it. So, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Rather than seeing what a sweet thing that she, and maybe even had a little sense of humor about it too, seeing that she wanted to do something that was nice for somebody else. And I totally squelched it. I was in too much of a hurry. And I'm thinking he needs to deal with that himself. To maybe stop we're always going so fast and so hard, but to see maybe what's behind some of the things that our kids are saying. If I could go back and redo that, I'd say, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And you can wrap it up. It could even be funny. But yeah, so squelched in a way a dream or a plan. So to really watch out for those things, I think those are some really huge things that we need to be careful of.
Mm-hmm. I think it's easy for us to squelch those dreams whenever they don't look like ours. Doesn't it
Yeah,
all come back to our own pride sometimes? No, we're not going to do that because this is what I
yeah.
envisioned we were going to do. Maybe we're talking to the mom who has a kiddo in high school, and you are envisioning that they're going to go to a 4-year university and graduate with honors and then get a master's degree and a PhD and all these things and work as a CEO. And your kiddo's, man, I just love music. Like, I don't
Mm,
wanna be at a 4-year school at all. I wanna go to creative arts, or maybe I wanna do something on the technical side, and so I'm gonna go to a technical school, and in 2 years, I'm gonna be certified to do something. I think that it's really easy to get caught up in that comparison, especially in those high school to college, that transition between high school and college whenever you, as a mom, are seeing what everybody else is doing, your kid is seeing what everybody else is doing, and really trying to hone in on, well, what's best for them? And if it doesn't look
mhm,
like everybody else, our own pride and our own
mhm.
expectations and wrestling with that and settling with that, that they are their own person and their own, God created them specifically for a reason. And maybe it looks different than all the neighbors, and being okay with that.
Yeah. And that, like you mentioned, they're seeing themselves and comparing themselves already. And this is like completely on steroids now because of
Yeah.
social media. And boy, I really recommend really reducing time on social media. And my youngest, who had struggled with mental health and struggled with depression, she actually has pretty much taken herself off of social media. And every once in a while she gets on, but she's realized that can be a trigger for her, even though she knows that this is just a snapshot of somebody's life in that moment. She's not seeing the before or the after. She's just seeing that snapshot. She knows this, but she's still seeing these things. And she's just decided that this is something that is probably just not good for her. And I recall I was looking at Facebook and I was checking out this friend of mine and I was thinking, wow, she gets to travel all the time. Like she's gone to so many places. I want to be able to do that. That's so cool. And then we got together for lunch at one point and she said to me, wow, you've really been traveling a lot. And I said, me? I said, what are you talking about? I'm looking at yours and I'm thinking that. And we both laughed because we were both putting out things that we thought were interesting. She was another author that were interesting and things you're not going to necessarily air all the hard things, right? And it was just so funny because we both had such a different perception.
Mhm.
And we need to remember that.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, the social media, if you've got a kiddo that's struggling with anxiety or depression or has gone so far as to begin to harm themselves or have attempted suicides, it's easy when their mind starts going in that direction, and I would say I'm guilty of it as well. I faced something hard, let's say, a struggle with a kid, and I'm really upset about it. I'm having those big emotions like you mentioned early on, and it's so easy for us to just pick up that device and escape dealing with our emotions
Mhm.
by scrolling, and even if it's watching funny videos, it's just this it's like a drug. It's just mesmerizing and it pulls you in, but what it's doing is you are now avoiding dealing with those emotions. And so you may be able to push them down for a minute, but because you're scrolling and you're avoiding. So, okay, I've suppressed that feeling of sadness due to a situation. Okay, I feel better now. I'm going to go on about my day. Tomorrow, now I'm angry about a situation. Well, I'm going to scroll, or I'm anxious, or I'm depressed. And you keep this pattern and you just keep layering these
Mhm.
feelings. And eventually, like Old Faithful, it's going to come up. And so there's a real danger there as well with the scrolling. Now I may step on some toes for my listeners, but you mentioned over spiritualizing. And so to the Christian mama who says, God's got this and I'm just going to pray this away. Both very true statements. God does have this at the end of the day. And yes, prayer is a powerful tool for us to use. But you made a comment that I heard where you said sometimes sharing scripture in specific moments doesn't, it's not beneficial.
Mhm.
Um, Over spiritualizing can often or possibly turn our kids away from God versus closer to God. So let's dive into that just a little bit. What do you mean by that?
We don't want to give our kids, when they're struggling, a platitude, right? We don't want to just toss out, God's got this, or when God closes a door, he opens a window. These are things that are not helpful in the moment at all. And like you said, Courtney, there's a lot of truth to those things, right? But they're not helpful in the moment because we're not connecting. We're actually disconnecting. We
Mm,
want to connect with our kids. So rather than throw out some spiritualized advice or what we think is wisdom, it would be more wise to be quiet and to listen and to sit with them in the thing, to empathize. And empathy and sympathy are a little bit different. Empathy is where you really come alongside, and sympathy separates you from someone. You're more like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you, right? Empathy is more sitting with the person in the middle of the mess. And that's what they need. That's what they need. They need you to be with them. God tells us, I am with you. Jesus's name, Emmanuel, I am with you. God is with you. Be with your kids in the moment. Don't throw out a scripture and think that you've solved the problem. It'll probably just bounce right off them, and they will be less likely to come to you if they need something, because they're going to think, Mom will just quote the Bible to me.
mm,
And even friends, I would avoid doing that. Avoid tossing out those platitudes, but be with them in the moment.
mhm,
And to over spiritualize is something that is like toxic positivity. It's not going to help. It doesn't help.
mm,
To remember those things and stuff that we can deal with if we have a posture of, on a regular basis, having a thankful heart and speaking thankful things, that changes our brain chemistry, changes our mindset. It transforms the mind, that thankful attitude. And if we can have that consistently, so that when something does go wrong, there's we've got some cushion, we can fall back on that a little bit. But in the middle of the mess, to throw out, it could be worse.
mm.
That's something
God won't
that,
give you more than you can handle.
Yes. And of course, we all know we get more than we can handle, and we do so that we can rely on the Lord and each other. We
Yeah.
all get more than we can handle. My goodness. So these are things that aren't helpful. So if we can, again, keep in mind just daily thankfulness so that when things that we're not so thankful for happen, we've got a little cushion. And that thankfulness can also increase what I would say, increase our trust in the Lord, and to remember who he is and remember what God's truths are in the midst of this, that God does have it and that he is King and Lord. And those are things that we can build upon so that when the mess comes upon us, then we've got that cushion. We know that God is with us. So if we can be with our kids when they're struggling, that is going to be way more helpful than us tossing out a platitude. And my youngest had a situation where after she graduated from college, she had two jobs that she had interviewed for. She'd interviewed for a few, but two in particular that really caught her attention that she thought she'd really like. But there was one that she would really prefer. And she got the one that she preferred the least. It was her second choice, but she really wanted the first choice. But she got the second choice. And as she was telling me that, I thought that, okay, that's good. Then she got a call about maybe a week after she accepted this other position and signed a contract. And it was from the other place and they wanted her. And she was so upset. And she called me. And what I wanted to say is God closes the door, he puts in a window, or God will work this out to the good for all those who love him and are called according to his purpose. I could have said all those things. I really wanted to. And praise the Lord, he shut my mouth. He put a guard over my mouth. I didn't say any of those things. And rather, he gave me the wisdom to say, I know that you're really sad about that. Go ahead and grieve that for a bit, but don't stay there. And that's what she needed to hear. And then a few months later, she called me up and she's, Mom, this was the job for me. This is exactly where God would have had me. But I could have stolen that aha moment from her by saying, I think this is what God wanted for you. And that wasn't the job. But sometimes we just need to zip it.
Wow, that is fantastic. Fantastic advice. I'm going to close out with just two final questions. One being, we have a listener who suspects that her child, let's say, is anxious, depressed, potentially having suicidal thoughts. What is some advice that you would give to them right now? How do they navigate this?
Yeah, this is super hard, but you have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask them. If you are afraid that they are thinking of taking their life, you're not the only one that's thought of that. And by asking the question, what you're doing is you're taking the responsibility off of the child for them to tell you. It's important that you can take that responsibility from them. Sometimes they're trying to protect you and they don't want you to know that they're struggling that much. And they want to protect you and not admit that. So if you can ask the hard question, or have you considered taking your life? Do you not want to live anymore? Those are questions that it's important to ask. And they're really hard, but they will not push your child over the edge to do something. You asking that question is a smart and a brave thing to do. And that relieves your child of the pressure of handling all this on their own. And they also know that you can handle it. If you can ask the question, then you can handle the answer. And then move on it, get help right away. And if if they're in college, maybe bringing them home, or what I did, go and stay for a period of time. Something so that they are not isolated, so that they are not alone and left to their own devices to fix what they think needs to be fixed by doing this. that's something that would be very critical to do. And it's very hard, but it is the best thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I was actually surprised. I talked to a counselor friend of mine about the hard questions, and I was surprised to learn that when you ask the hard questions, have you made a plan
Hmm.
to take your life? They are willing to admit it. I had always assumed if I ask that question or the hard questions, they're not going to be honest with me. But what you just said, oftentimes they are. And that's what the counselor friend of mine that we had talked about the same thing.
Hmm.
They are willing to tell you and
It
admit,
removes the burden from
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Hmm.
man, so good. I close the show every time with asking my guest, is there something specific that you are praying for? And is there a verse that I could share with the listeners?
I'll start with the verse. It's John 16:33, where Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." In this world you will have trouble. Jesus tells it like it is. That's reality.
Mhm.
Now here's the hope. Take heart. I have overcome the world. Reality and hope. And those are two really important things. And
Mhm.
then as far as prayer goes, I would just love to have prayer for an upcoming project that I am working on and God's very clear, direct direction.
Okay. We can do that. I do want to ask this final question because I feel like the listeners may want to know, how is your youngest doing?
She's great. She's thriving. For a while, surviving was the victory,
Mm.
and that is a victory. But now she's actually thriving. I'm very happy to say that she's doing well.
I really appreciate your willingness to come on and share this very personal and intimate story with us and the advice and the wisdom that you have given. I appreciate her as well for the willingness to allow mom to share these stories. I
Mhm.
know that can't be easy, but man, the struggles and the pain that she has experienced clearly had a purpose greater than I bet either one of you could have imagined. Now that you have written this book and in reading it, you share her story and the difference that it is making in other people's lives. And so please thank her for us as well.
I will.
Awesome. It was so great to be with you today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for having me. God bless
Of
you and your
course.
ministry.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to you. Remember to check the show notes for links to the books and all of the resources mentioned in today's episode. If you want to print, screenshot, or share this week's verse, head to the show notes where you're going to find a link to my website and a graphic for you to use. Thanks so much for listening to Masquerade of Motherhood with Courtney Doyle. We want to be sure this blesses you and other mothers. And in order to do this, first, you must subscribe. This way you won't ever miss an episode. Also, if you'll rate and review this podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening, this will increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.